The German Shepherd did not bark when Caleb Whitaker walked into the Oregon shelter. He just stood at the end of the kennel row, old, scarred, and shaking under the yellow light, staring at the former U.S. Marine like a ghost had come back wearing boots. Caleb had driven 312 miles because of one blurry photo online, one crescent-shaped scar, one pair of amber eyes he had buried in his memory 7 years ago. "Sir," the shelter worker whispered, "are you sure that's your dog?" Caleb's hand tightened around the rusted dog tag on his chain. "No," he said, voice breaking. "I'm afraid he is." The dog growled when Caleb stepped closer. He did not remember the man's face. Not the beard. Not the limp. Not the years of pain carved into him. Caleb slowly knelt on the cold concrete, placed the old tag between them, and touched 2 fingers to his chest. Then he whispered the command no one else in the world knew. "Cover left, Atlas." The dog froze. Every kennel went silent. Caleb whispered again, "Find me where I fall." The German Shepherd's legs buckled first. Then he lunged forward with a sound that was almost human. And when the kennel door opened, Caleb collapsed into his fur before anyone learned what really happened the day Atlas disappeared. He had not come to adopt a dog. He had come to find out whether grief had finally learned how to breathe. The rain fell softly over Bend, Oregon, tapping on the tin roof of the small county shelter like fingers on an old chapel door. Inside, the air carried the clean sting of disinfectant, wet fur, and something harder to name, the quiet fear of animals who had waited too long for footsteps that never stopped at their cage. Caleb Whitaker stood just inside the entrance, a 37-year-old former United States Marine with pale skin weathered by wind, short brown hair touched with gray at the temples, and blue eyes that looked steady only because they had forgotten how to rest. His jacket was zipped to the throat, though the hallway was warm. His right hand stayed closed around something beneath the fabric of his shirt, a small piece of metal worn smooth by 7 years of prayerless nights. The shelter worker beside him, a woman named Claire Beaumont, watched him with the careful kindness of someone who had seen people come in hoping for miracles and leave carrying silence instead. "He's at the end," she said gently. "We call him Old Soldier." Caleb did not answer. The name struck somewhere deep, but he kept walking. One kennel after another flared with sound as he passed, paws against chain link, tails thumping, nervous barks echoing beneath fluorescent lights. Caleb barely heard them. He heard something else, something older, softer, impossible. A memory of paws moving beside his left boot. A low breath in desert dark. A body leaning against his knee as if the world could fall apart. But not here, not between them. At the last kennel, the noise changed. It did not stop all at once. It folded inward, like a room holding its breath. A German Shepherd stood in the back corner beneath a yellow bulb, tall despite his age, leaned beneath a coat of dark sable fur streaked with ash around the muzzle. His ears were uneven now, one standing higher than the other. His left shoulder carried a crescent-shaped scar half hidden under dull fur. His amber eyes were fixed on Caleb with a depth that made the man stop before he meant to. No bark, no wagging tail, no rush of recognition. Only the stare of a creature who had survived too many roads to trust the shape of a man. Caleb's throat tightened. The shelter worker lowered her voice. "He doesn't let anyone touch his collar. He sleeps facing the door. If a helicopter passes, he won't move for an hour. We thought maybe he had military training." Caleb's fingers opened beneath his shirt and found the old dog tag hanging there, warm from his skin. He had not shown it to anyone in years. Not to doctors. Not to neighbors. Not to the chaplain who once told him healing began with acceptance. Caleb had accepted many things. A limp that came and went with cold weather. Empty mornings. The chair beside his kitchen table that stayed unused. But he had never accepted the absence of Atlas. The German Shepherd in the kennel shifted his weight. A faint tremor moved through his front legs. Claire glanced between them. "Mr. Whitaker," she said softly, "are you sure this is your dog?" Caleb looked at the scar on the shoulder, the slight bend in the right ear, the way the dog kept his body angled to guard the left side of the kennel door. It was a habit no shelter could teach. It belonged to a different life, to red dust and sleepless watch, to a command spoken under breath when darkness pressed too close. Caleb swallowed. "No," he said, and his voice was almost gone. "I'm afraid he is." The dog gave a low warning sound. Not cruel, not wild, just afraid enough to protect whatever pieces of himself remained. Caleb did not step closer. He lowered himself slowly to one knee on the cold concrete, ignoring the ache that pulled through his leg. He took the dog tag from his neck and placed it on the floor between them. The metal turned once in the light. Atlas. USMC K9. The shepherd's eyes dropped to it. For one long second, nothing happened. Then Caleb touched 2 fingers to the center of his chest, exactly where his hand used to rest before a night patrol, and whispered a command no one in that shelter had ever heard. Cover left, Atlas. The German shepherd froze. The tremor left his legs and entered the air. Every kennel fell strangely quiet, as though even the forgotten dogs understood that something buried had just moved. Caleb's face broke before his body did. He leaned closer, barely breathing, and spoke the second phrase, the one he had carved into memory because it was all he had left of the day they were separated. Find me where I fall. Atlas lifted his head. A sound came from him then, thin and wounded with years, not quite a whine, not quite a prayer. Claire's hand flew to the latch. Caleb reached out, palm open, but he did not touch first. He let the dog choose. And in the yellow light at the end of the shelter row, the old German shepherd took one step forward, then another, carrying 7 years of silence toward the man who had never stopped leaving water by the door. Atlas did not run at first. He moved like an old memory afraid of being touched, one paw forward, then stopping, his amber eyes locked on Caleb's open hand. The shelter hallway stayed silent behind them. Even the rain seemed to soften against the roof. Caleb kept his palm low, fingers loose, the way he had been taught long ago, the way he had once approached dogs carrying fear in their bones. Easy boy, he whispered. His voice shook, but he did not reach farther. Atlas had to cross the last inch himself. The German shepherd lowered his nose to the dog tag on the concrete and breathed it in. Metal. Skin. Years. Then his muzzle lifted toward Caleb's sleeve. He smelled the worn denim, the cold rain, the faint trace of engine oil from the small repair shop where Caleb worked outside Tacoma. Beneath all that, something older waited. A scent buried under time, sorrow, hospital rooms, and lonely winters. Caleb watched the recognition come slowly, painfully, like sunrise through heavy fog. Atlas's ears twitched. His chest rose once, deep and uneven. Then the dog pressed his nose into Caleb's palm. The touch was so gentle that Caleb almost missed it. Almost. His eyes closed. For 7 years, he had imagined this moment in 100 different ways. Atlas leaping into his arms. Atlas barking with joy. Atlas young again, strong again, untouched by time. But this was quieter, more sacred. The dog simply rested his muzzle in Caleb's hand as if checking whether the man was real. Caleb bowed his head until his forehead nearly touched the chain link. I looked for you, he said, the words breaking apart. I swear I looked. Claire Beaumont stood a few feet away, one hand still on the latch, her eyes shining but her face composed. She had seen reunions before. Dogs recognizing families. Children crying over old pets. Veterans kneeling beside service animals. But this was different. This felt less like a reunion and more like 2 survivors reaching across a river no one else could see. Atlas gave another soft sound and stepped closer to the gate. Caleb saw then how thin he was beneath the thick fur, how the bones of age and hardship had shaped him. There were small scars along his legs, a cloudy edge in one eye, and a tiredness around his mouth that made Caleb's chest ache. What happened to you, buddy? He whispered. Atlas pushed harder against the gate, not frantic, not loud, just certain. Claire opened it slowly. The latch clicked. That small sound carried through the shelter like a church bell. For a heartbeat, Atlas stood in the open doorway, free to choose the room, the worker, the exit, the world beyond the hallway. He chose Caleb. The German shepherd stepped into him with all the strength he had left, pressing his head beneath Caleb's chin, his body trembling from nose to tail. Caleb wrapped both arms around him and held on as if the ground might take the dog away again. He did not care that the concrete was cold. He did not care that his knee burned, or that Claire was watching, or that every buried year had suddenly found its way to the surface. Atlas leaned his full weight into him, and Caleb folded around that familiar shape. You found me. Caleb breathed into the old sable fur. You found me after all. But when Caleb shifted back, his hand brushed the torn collar around Atlas's neck. Something was tied beneath it, hidden under the matted fur. Claire noticed his expression change. "We tried to remove that," she said softly. "He would not let us near it." Caleb's fingers stilled. Beneath the collar was a faded strip of tan field bandage, weathered almost white, knotted with careful human hands. Caleb knew that fabric. He knew the pattern, the rough edge, the small dark mark where his own initials had once been written in permanent marker. His breath caught. That bandage had come from his emergency kit overseas. He had tied it around Atlas on the last day they were together, just before the smoke separated them. Caleb looked down at the old dog in his arms, and the shelter seemed to tilt around him. Atlas had not simply wandered home through chance. Someone had found him. Someone had kept that bandage on him. And whatever had happened during those missing 7 years, it had followed Atlas all the way back to this rain-soaked shelter in Oregon. Caleb did not untie the bandage. Not there. Not with Atlas still trembling against him and the shelter lights buzzing overhead like insects in a summer barn. He only touched the old knot with the edge of his thumb, careful and reverent, as if it were not cloth at all, but a letter written by time. Atlas felt the touch and turned his head, placing his body between Caleb's hand and the collar. Not aggressively, protectively. The gesture was so familiar that Caleb almost smiled through the ache. Even after 7 years, Atlas still guarded the thing that mattered. Claire knelt a few feet away, keeping her distance. When animal control brought him in, he was near the rail yard outside Redmond, she said softly. About 20 miles from here. He was exhausted, but he kept circling an old freight office like he was waiting for someone. Caleb looked up. A rail yard. Claire nodded. A volunteer found him curled beside a stack of wooden pallets. He had no microchip we could read. The scanner kept failing around his shoulder, maybe scar tissue, maybe an old implant that shifted. We called the military working dog registry, but without a clear number, they could not confirm anything. Caleb lowered his eyes to Atlas. He never liked trains, he murmured. Too many sharp sounds. At the word sounds, Atlas's ears flicked toward the rain tapping the roof. Caleb felt the dog tense, then settle when Caleb's palm rested against his chest. That was when the hallway changed for him. It was no longer only a shelter in Oregon. It became a narrow line of memory, stretching back across years to a white sun, red dust, and the quiet before a patrol moved out. Atlas had always walked on Caleb's left. Not because the manual said so, because Caleb trusted that side less after an old shoulder injury, and Atlas somehow knew it. Every morning, before the team stepped beyond the wire, Caleb would crouch, touch 2 fingers to his chest, and whisper, "Cover left." Atlas would lean once into his knee, a promise without language. The other Marines used to laugh about it. Corporal Miles Donnelly, red-haired and always chewing cinnamon gum, once shook his head and said, "Whitaker, that dog listens better than most people I know." Caleb had answered, "That is because he knows when to ignore me." The memory warmed and hurt at the same time. Back then, Atlas was 5 years old, powerful and quick, with a dark saddle across his back and eyes bright enough to catch moonlight. He could find a hidden object under sand, sense tension in a crowded alley, and calm a shaking young Marine by resting his head against the boy's boot. He was not just trained. He was tuned to what people tried not to show. Caleb remembered one night in particular, a long watch outside a temporary medical tent. A young corpsman had been sitting alone on an ammunition crate, hands locked together, staring at nothing. No one had told Atlas to go to him. The dog simply rose, crossed the gravel, and sat at the man's feet until the corpsman finally put one hand between his ears and began to breathe again. That was Atlas. He found what was breaking before it made a sound. In the shelter, Caleb looked at the old dog and saw both creatures at once. The warrior he had trusted in dust and darkness, and the tired survivor standing under a yellow bulb, carrying secrets in a torn collar. Claire stood slowly. "We have his intake file in the office. There were a few things found near him. Nothing valuable, but maybe they mean something to you." Caleb nodded, though his throat was tight. Atlas followed when Caleb tried to rise, pressing close to his left leg with such instinctive precision that Claire drew in a quiet breath. Caleb noticed it too. He did not give a command. He did not need to. The dog had remembered the place where he belonged. Together, they walked down the kennel row, past the watching dogs and the smell of rain-soaked concrete. In Claire's office, beneath a desk lamp, she opened a plain cardboard box. Inside lay an old leash clip, a cracked piece of leather, and a small, dirt-stained photograph sealed in plastic. Caleb reached for the photograph first. It showed Atlas younger, standing beside a man Caleb did not know, somewhere on American soil. Behind them was a faded sign with only 3 readable words. Veterans Outreach Farm. Caleb stared at it, his breath slowing. Atlas had not vanished into nothing. He had lived another life. And somewhere between that farm, the rail yard, and this shelter, someone had been trying to send him home. The photograph did not explain everything. It only opened a door Caleb had been too afraid to touch. Veterans Outreach Farm. 3 words printed in faded blue behind. A younger Atlas, standing beside a man in a straw hat and a denim jacket, sunlight spilling over a wooden fence. Caleb held the picture so carefully that the plastic sleeve barely moved. Atlas sat against his left leg, watching his hands, not the photo. Claire leaned over the desk and studied the back of the image. "There is a date," she said. 3 years ago. And a town name. Silver Creek, Idaho. Caleb knew the place only as a dot on a map, somewhere east of the Oregon line, surrounded by open fields and long roads that disappeared into dry hills. "Why would he be there?" he whispered. Claire did not answer, because kindness has limits when truth has not arrived yet. She opened the intake report and slid it across the desk. The paper listed weight, condition, markings, found location, and behavior notes. Caleb read every line slowly. Male German Shepherd. Estimated age 12. Severe fatigue. Protective response to collar. Responds to low whistle. Comms when positioned near left side of handler. That last word struck him harder than he expected. Handler. Not owner. Not adopter. Handler. Someone at the shelter had seen what Caleb had almost forgotten how to believe. Atlas belonged beside a person not as property, but as a partner. Caleb folded the paper once and placed it near the photograph. "I need to find this farm," he said. Claire glanced toward the window. Outside, the rain had thickened into silver lines beneath the parking lot lights. "It is late," she said. "You should rest first." Caleb looked down at Atlas. The old dog's breathing had evened out, but his eyes stayed open, fixed on Caleb with the same quiet duty he had carried years before. Rest had become a word Caleb respected but rarely trusted. "I have rested for 7 years," he said. "He has been walking." Claire understood then. She did not argue. She made 2 copies of the photograph, printed the intake file, and packed the small items from the box into a paper bag. Before Caleb left, she brought out a soft blanket and a faded red leash donated by a family whose dog had passed the winter before. Atlas allowed Caleb to clip it to the torn collar, but only after Caleb touched 2 fingers to his chest and waited. Outside, the Oregon night smelled of wet pine, asphalt, and distant wood smoke. Caleb opened the passenger door of his old Ford truck. Atlas paused at the edge of the seat, older legs uncertain. For a moment, Caleb saw the proud working dog who used to leap into vehicles without waiting. Then he saw the years in the stiffness of his hips. Without a word, Caleb lifted him gently, supporting his chest and hind legs, careful not to press the scarred shoulder. Atlas did not resist. He only tucked his head against Caleb's neck, and the warmth of that trust nearly broke him again. The drive toward Tacoma stretched dark and quiet, more than 200 miles of wet highway and glowing mile markers. Atlas slept at first, curled on the blanket, but every time Caleb shifted in the driver's seat, the dog opened one eye to check him. Around midnight, near a gas station outside Salem, Caleb stopped to fill the tank. The pump clicked softly. Rain slid down the windshield. Inside the cab, Atlas lifted his head and stared past Caleb toward a delivery truck idling under white lights. Its brakes hissed. The sound was ordinary, but Atlas stiffened so quickly that Caleb saw the old fear move through him. Caleb returned, opened the door, and placed his hand on the dog's chest. "You are not there," he whispered. "Neither am I." Atlas trembled once, then leaned into the hand. That was how they drove the rest of the way, not as a man and his missing dog, not yet as healed souls, but as 2 survivors learning the geography of the present. When Caleb finally reached his small rented house outside Tacoma, the sky had begun to pale at the edges. The porch light flickered over the bowl he had kept by the door for 7 years. Empty most mornings. Refilled every night. Atlas saw it before Caleb touched the keys. The old German Shepherd stepped slowly from the truck, crossed the damp porch boards, and lowered his muzzle to the bowl. He drank as if answering a promise. Caleb stood behind him, the the paper bag from the shelter in one hand, the photograph in the other. Somewhere in Idaho, a farm had held part of the story. Somewhere between that farm and the rail yard, someone had guided Atlas close enough to be found. And as dawn broke over the quiet street, Caleb understood that bringing Atlas home was not the end of the search. It was the beginning. The house had not changed enough to welcome him properly. It was still narrow, quiet, and dim before sunrise, with work boots by the door, a folded Marine Corps sweatshirt on the chair, and a kitchen table set for one because Caleb had stopped pretending anyone else was coming. Atlas stepped inside slowly, nose low, reading the room through scent. He found the baseboard near the hallway, the wool rug by the couch, the corner where Caleb kept his toolbox. Then he stopped in front of the small wooden shelf beside the window. On it sat a framed photograph, a tarnished challenge coin, and the old leather collar Caleb had bought years ago but never used. Atlas lifted his muzzle toward it and released a breath so soft it barely stirred the dust. Caleb watched from the doorway, afraid to move too quickly, afraid the whole morning might vanish if he touched it wrong. "That was supposed to be yours," he said. Atlas turned, and for a moment, the gray around his muzzle disappeared beneath memory. Caleb set the shelter bag on the table and filled a bowl with food, placing it on the left side of the kitchen just as he used to do. Atlas waited, not for permission exactly, for rhythm. Caleb realized it with a small, aching smile. "All right," he whispered. "Eat." The dog lowered his head and began slowly, carefully, as though every bite had to be believed before it could be swallowed. Caleb sat on the floor across from him, back against the cabinet, the photograph from Idaho resting in his hand. Veterans Outreach Farm, Silver Creek. 3 years ago. The name felt like a trail marker placed by someone who knew he would one day need it. When Atlas finished, he did not explore the bedroom or the couch. He walked to the front door, turned once, and lay down facing it. Guard position. Caleb knew it before the dog's chest touched the floor. The sight moved through him with a quiet force. In all the years Caleb had lived alone, no lock had ever made the house feel protected. But one tired German shepherd did. By mid-morning, pale light spread through the blinds. Caleb had not slept. He sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, searching for the farm in Idaho while Atlas rested at his feet. The website was old, simple, almost forgotten. A few photographs of barns, veterans planting vegetables, horses in fenced pasture, dogs lying in sunlight. The mission statement said the farm helped former service members rebuild routine through animal care, outdoor work, and quiet community. Caleb scrolled until his hand stopped. There, in a photo gallery from 3 years earlier, was Atlas. Younger than he was now, but older than Caleb remembered, standing beside the same man from the printed photograph. The caption underneath read, "Harlan Reed and Shepherd, Volunteer Therapy Team, Spring Open House." Caleb spoke the name under his breath. Harlan Reed. Atlas lifted his head. Not sharply, not with fear, with recognition. Caleb turned from the screen and looked at him. "You know that name." Atlas's tail moved once against the floor. It was not much, but it was enough. Caleb searched again. Harlan Reed, Silver Creek, Idaho. The results came slowly. A local article from years ago, a veterans program notice, a church bulletin mentioning volunteers, then a short obituary. Harlan Joseph Reed, United States Army veteran, beloved mentor, caretaker, and friend to many at Veterans Outreach Farm. Caleb read the date twice. Harlan had passed away 8 months earlier. The room seemed to grow quieter, not empty, but respectful, as if a man Caleb had never met had just entered it through his name. Atlas rose with effort and came to Caleb's chair. He placed his muzzle on Caleb's knee, eyes lowered. Grief recognized grief. Caleb rested a hand between the old dog's ears. "He took care of you," he said softly. Atlas leaned harder into him. On the farm website, Caleb found a contact number and called before courage could thin out. A woman answered on the 4th ring, her voice warm but guarded. "Veterans Outreach Farm, this is Mary Ann." Caleb looked at Atlas, then at the faded bandage beneath the torn collar. "My name is Caleb Whitaker," he said. "I think my military working dog lived there with a man named Harlan Reed." Silence followed. Then the woman inhaled sharply. "Is the dog's name Atlas?" Caleb closed his eyes. Across the small kitchen, morning light touched the empty water bowl by the door. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "He came home." Mary Ann did not speak for several seconds. When she did, her voice had changed. "Then you need to come to Idaho," she said. Harlan left something for the Marine who would say those words. Caleb packed before the call had fully ended, though there was not much to pack. A clean shirt, a worn field jacket, the shelter file, the photograph sealed in plastic, the old dog tag. Atlas watched from the doorway as if counting every movement, his ears following the zipper of the duffel, the click of keys, the scrape of Caleb's boots against the floor. When Caleb lifted the torn red leash, Atlas stood without being asked. The message was plain. Wherever the road went now, they would walk it together. By late afternoon, the old Ford was heading east, leaving Tacoma under a ceiling of gray clouds. The highway stretched ahead in long wet ribbons, past fir trees, open fields, and towns small enough to disappear in the rearview mirror before Caleb learned their names. Atlas lay across the passenger seat on the blanket Claire had given him, his muzzle resting near Caleb's thigh. Every few minutes, the dog opened his eyes, checked Caleb's hand on the wheel, and slept again. The quiet between them no longer felt empty. It felt like a language returning. Near the Washington border, the rain broke. Sunlight spilled through the clouds in pale gold shafts, touching the windshield, the dashboard, the gray around Atlas's muzzle. Caleb glanced over and found the dog watching him. "You remember Idaho, do you?" he asked softly. Atlas gave a low breath, not quite a sigh, and placed one paw over the edge of the seat, close to Caleb's leg. Caleb took that as an answer. The road into Silver Creek narrowed after sunset, curving between dry hills and fenced pastureland. The air changed there. Less salt, more dust, hay, and wood smoke. Caleb drove past a diner with one flickering sign, a feed store closed for the night, and a white church whose bell tower rose against a violet sky. At the edge of town, a hand-painted sign appeared beside a gravel road. Veterans Outreach Farm. The truck slowed before Caleb told it to. Atlas lifted his head. His body became still, but not afraid. Alert. Remembering. The farmhouse stood beyond a line of cottonwoods, its porch light glowing warm against the deepening blue. A red barn sat farther back, and beyond it Caleb could see fenced paddocks, a greenhouse, and rows of winter soil resting under straw. A woman stepped onto the porch before he parked. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair braided over one shoulder, a canvas coat, and the steady posture of someone who had spent years holding broken people without making them feel broken. Caleb knew her voice before she introduced herself. Marianne. Atlas was the first out when Caleb opened the door. Old legs or not, he moved toward the porch with sudden purpose. Marianne brought both hands to her mouth. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. Atlas reached the steps and stopped in front of her. For a moment, he only looked at her. Then he lowered his head against her knee. Marianne bent over him, one hand pressed into his fur, the other covering her eyes. Caleb stood by the truck, watching a reunion he had not expected to witness. It humbled him. It also hurt. Atlas had been loved in the years Caleb could not find him. That truth was not betrayal. It was mercy. Marianne looked up at Caleb with tears bright on her face. "Harlan said he belonged to someone before us," she said. "He said no dog waits like that unless his first promise is still alive." Caleb walked closer, each step heavy with gratitude he had no words for. How did Harlan find him? Marianne glanced toward the barn, where a single yellow light burned above the door. "Not tonight from the porch," she said softly. "Some stories deserve a table, a chair, and enough silence around them." Inside the farmhouse, the kitchen smelled of coffee, cedar, and warm bread. Marianne set a small wooden box on the table. It was scratched, plain, and sealed with a strip of tape that had yellowed at the edges. Across the top, written in careful block letters, were 5 words. "For the Marine Atlas remembers." Caleb did not touch it at first. Atlas stood beside him, his shoulder against Caleb's left leg, as though bracing him for whatever waited inside. Marianne folded her hands. "Harlan made me promise not to open it," she said. "He said the right man would arrive with the right dog." Caleb stared at the box, hearing the rain from Oregon, the shelter latch, the old whisper, the water bowl by his door. Then he reached forward and broke the seal. The seal gave way with a dry whisper, and Caleb felt Atlas press closer before the lid even opened. Inside the wooden box lay 3 things arranged with a care that made the room feel smaller: a folded letter, a small flash drive, and a faded green collar tag shaped like a bone. Caleb picked up the tag first. The engraving was worn, but still readable beneath the kitchen light. Shepherd. Found near Highway 93. July 14th. Marianne touched the edge of the table. That was the name Harlan used before we knew better, she said softly. He said the dog came out of the heat like he had been walking through another life. Caleb turned the tag over. On the back, someone had scratched 2 words by hand. Still waiting. His chest tightened. Atlas lowered his head, as if the words carried a sound only he could hear. Caleb unfolded the letter next. The paper had been written in steady blue ink, the kind of handwriting that belonged to a patient man. Caleb read silently at first, but after the first line, his voice came out without permission. To the Marine who taught this dog how to keep faith. The room held still. Marianne sat across from him, eyes lowered. Atlas remained upright against Caleb's left leg, old body braced like a post in high wind. Caleb continued, his voice rough but clear. My name is Harlan Reed. I served in the United States Army long before your war, but I know the look of a soul that keeps standing after the body gets tired. I found your dog on a county road outside Silver Creek 5 years after he should have been found by someone else. He was thin, quiet, and carrying a strip of field bandage under his collar like it was his last order. He would not let me remove it. So, I did not. Caleb stopped. His hand moved to Atlas's neck, to the faded bandage still tucked beneath the torn shelter collar. Marianne poured coffee, though no one drank it. The sound of the pot felt almost too loud. Caleb read on. For weeks, Shepherd would sleep by the barn door facing west. Every truck made him lift his head. Every man in boots made him stand. He was polite to me, kind to the veterans, gentle with the horses, but he was never mine. Some dogs can be adopted. Some are only being sheltered until the person they chose finds the road back. Caleb's eyes blurred, but he did not fold the letter. Not yet. One night during a storm, a young Marine named Joshua came here after losing his way in more ways than one. He had not spoken all day. Shepherd walked across the room, laid his head on that boy's knee, and stayed until Joshua finally whispered, I want to go home. That is when I understood. Your dog was not waiting empty. He was working while he waited. He was carrying men across small bridges none of us could see. Atlas gave a soft breath and leaned harder into Caleb. The kitchen seemed to fill with all the people Caleb had never met, men and women who had sat in this farmhouse with their hands around coffee mugs, pretending they were fine until an old German shepherd rested beside them and made pretending unnecessary. Caleb turned the page. If you are reading this, then the Lord has allowed the promise to circle back. I do not know your name. I only know his. I know because one winter evening, when fever had him restless and half dreaming, I heard him make a sound that was not a bark. I bent close, and I swear to you, I heard a shape in that sound. Atlas. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe old soldiers hear what they need to hear. But from that night on, I called him Atlas when no one else was listening. He always looked up. Caleb covered his mouth with one hand. The name had survived. Across states, across years, across the quiet mercy of a stranger. Marianne whispered, Harlan told me that part once. I thought he was being poetic. Caleb shook his head, unable to speak. Harlan had not known the command. He had not known the dog tag. He had not known the man who left water by a porch in Washington. But he had listened. Sometimes that was how miracles traveled, not through thunder, not through crowds, but through one old man refusing to treat a wounded animal like a mystery to be solved quickly. Caleb looked back at the final lines. There is a video on the drive. I recorded it when I knew my time was getting short. Not for sadness, for directions. If Atlas finds you, there is one more place he needs to go. Not because he is lost, but because he left something here that belongs to both of you. The letter ended with a simple signature. Harlan Reed, caretaker, United States Army, and temporary friend to a faithful dog. Caleb set the paper down with both hands. For a long moment, the only sound was Atlas breathing beside him. Then Marianne slid a small laptop across the table and placed the flash drive in his palm. Caleb stared at it, as if it weighed more than metal and plastic. Atlas lifted his head toward the dark window, toward the barn beyond the glass, toward whatever Harlan had left unfinished. Caleb inserted the drive. The screen flickered once. An old man's face appeared in soft barn light, eyes tired, smile gentle. Before Harlan spoke, Atlas stood. Atlas stood before Harlan Reed said a word. as if the old voice had reached him before the speakers did. On the laptop screen, Harlan sat inside the red barn under a warm hanging bulb, wearing the same denim jacket from the photograph. His face was thinner than in the picture, his white beard trimmed short, his eyes gentle but tired in the way of men who have carried many winters without complaint. Behind him, hay bales lined the wall, and a lantern glowed near a stall door. He looked directly into the camera and smiled faintly. "Well," he said, "if you are seeing this, then Shepard found his way back to the name he was born to answer." Caleb's hand tightened on the edge of the table. Atlas took one slow step toward the laptop, then another, until his nose nearly touched the screen. Harlan continued, voice low and even. "I never knew your face, Marine. I only knew the shape of your absence. This dog carried it. Like a second collar." Caleb closed his eyes for a moment. Marianne wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "He waited by my west fence every evening for the first year," Harlan said. "Same hour, same posture, facing the road. I used to think he was watching the sunset. Then I learned he was watching for headlights." Atlas made a small sound, and Caleb placed a hand on his back. Harlan leaned closer to the camera. "There is something you need to know. About 6 months after I found him, I took him to the county fairgrounds for a veterans outreach event. A transport truck backfired in the parking lot, and Shepard slipped his lead. I was too slow to catch him. I found him half an hour later behind the old chapel on the property, digging at the base of a cottonwood tree like the earth owed him an answer." Harlan paused, looking down at something off camera. When he lifted his eyes again, they shone. He would not leave that tree. Not for food. Not for water. Not even for me. So I got a shovel. Caleb leaned forward, breath held. The kitchen seemed to disappear around him. Buried under that cottonwood, Harlan said, was a small metal canister. Military issue, maybe from an old field kit. Inside was a torn photograph, a damaged patch, and a second dog tag. Not his. Yours. Caleb stopped breathing. Atlas pressed against his leg, steadying him as if the dog remembered the weight of that discovery too. Harlan reached off screen and held up a plastic evidence sleeve. Inside was a dog tag Caleb recognized before his mind accepted it. Whitaker, Caleb J. The letters were dulled but alive. "I do not know how it got there," Harlan said. "Maybe someone found him overseas and kept what was with him. Maybe some part of his journey passed through hands that meant well and never knew where to send the pieces. But I know what Shepard did after we found it. He carried that tag in his mouth all the way back to the truck, climbed into the passenger seat, and laid it in my lap. Then he looked at me like he had completed an order." Caleb covered his face. The room blurred into light and shadow. He remembered losing that tag during the final mission. He remembered waking without it. He remembered the hollow space on his chest where identity used to hang. Harlan's voice softened. "I kept it safe. Not because it was mine to keep, but because the dog believed it mattered. Tomorrow, Marianne will take you to the chapel tree. The canister is there, under the floorboard of the little maintenance shed. I asked her not to move it unless the right man came." On screen, Harlan looked past the camera, and for the first time, his composure trembled. "If you are that man, I need to tell you something plain. Do not spend another year punishing yourself for the years you missed. That dog did not. He kept serving. He kept loving. He kept waiting without bitterness. Learn from him, Marine. Some souls do not come back to accuse us. They come back to bring us home." The video ended not with music, not with farewell, but with Harlan turning his head and speaking gently to someone just out of frame. "Come here, Atlas." On the screen, a younger Atlas entered the barn light, rested his head on Harlan's knee, and looked straight into the camera. In the farmhouse kitchen, the old Atlas answered with one quiet whine, as though hearing himself across time. Caleb lowered himself to the floor beside him. He wrapped one arm around the German shepherd's shoulders and pressed his forehead into the gray fur. No one spoke. The Idaho night gathered outside the windows. Somewhere beyond the barn, under a cottonwood tree beside an old chapel, a piece of Caleb's lost life was waiting in the dark, and for the first time in 7 years, he was no longer afraid to find it.